So I'm really delighted to introduce Lokabandhu to you. I've known him for quite a while. I think I first met him probably in a field at the Buddha Field Festival, where I have got an image of him sitting, looking very relaxed and calm, surrounded by kind of chaos and all sorts, joyous frivolity and the whole festival world unfolding. And he always seemed a real still point at the heart of it for me, very calm, responsive, kind, available in times of need or response to questions. So yeah, he was a very steady presence for me at the festival. And later, I think, we also had a bit of overlap when we were both trustees of the Karuna Trust, which supports social work, responding to all kinds of needs in India and in Nepal now also. And he was a delight to have at that meeting, bringing all sorts of valuable and unexpected perspectives, and usually arriving, whatever the weather, in sandals and no socks. I remember looking underneath the table and thinking, my goodness, his toes must be cold, but I didn't think they were. I think he's just got better circulation than me. So I've enjoyed the times when our paths have crossed. And it was this theme, actually, for this Sangha program, in part grew out of a conversation that I had with him a couple of months ago about the question of, well, what is it to practice the Dharma? What is it to live a Dharma life? And in particular, in that conversation, we were talking about how we engage with the world. So taking our practice off the cushion, and what does it look like to do that in a way which is aligned with Dharma practice? So you have him partly to thank for us embarking on this theme. He's been ordained since 1990. He was around the London Buddhist Centre, and then he was very involved as one of the people initially setting up Buddha Field, and taking in a way the teachings of the Buddha into the Glastonbury Festival. They went and set up a tent there and taught people to meditate, and still do. So yeah, so he's been engaged with the Buddha Field project, and then, as I said, with Karuna. Spent quite a lot of time in India with our Dharma siblings who are part of the movement in India. So he brings also quite a bit of understanding of what it's like to practice, to be part of the Triratna community and in India. And sometimes that has really, I think, quite a different flavour to how we might practice here in the UK or in Denmark, if anyone is there. Yeah, and so he's been involved with all sorts of projects and supporting, either willing to be upfront and pioneering, or quite happy to be quietly in the background and supporting others. And he lives now quite near to Glastonbury Tor. He might even be able to see it, I think, from the window in his loft where he is now. So it's very lovely to have this chance over Zoom that he can beam in from Glastonbury and yeah, just share a little bit with us on his theme of, the title of the talk, I think, was Buddhists like retreating, should they be advancing? So he'll say a little bit, I'm sure, about that theme, and perhaps more personally about his own life. So I will hand over at this point to Lokabandhu.
So, thank you, Saravantu. Just check, can you all hear me? Do a wave or something, just so I know. It's slightly odd just speaking abstractly to a laptop, but I see a thumbs up, at least one. So if you can't, please make it known, and Vajrapriya will do the necessary, or I will. Yeah, thank you, Saravantu. Nice to have an introduction. And one piece of news is I do now wear socks. I now wear socks. I think we've all got a bit older, and common sense has crept in, and I now wear socks. So there you go. One thing I was reflecting on, kind of preparing for this talk, is it's quite strange preparing to give a talk to people you've never met in a town you've never been to. And genuinely, one of my regrets is I've never been to Shrewsbury. I passed through it ever so briefly once in a car. For some reason, I couldn't stop. And I just got this sense of a really handsome, interesting, just the right sized town that was really appealing to me. But I never stopped, and I've never been back. And it is a regret. So at least I'm talking to you now, and hopefully visit one day. But something Saravanta said a minute ago is maybe you're not all in Shrewsbury. There was mention of Denmark. So one strange thing about Zoom is we can be all over the place, and it doesn't seem to matter. So I'm personally sitting up in my attic in our house in Glastonbury. I live here with my partner, 2 cats, and her autistic son, and I've been here quite a few years now. And yeah, I'm just really happy actually to be talking on this theme, which I understand is a whole season you've got, different people putting forward different thoughts and reflections on living the Dharma life, how to take what we learn about the Dharma out into our lives. And I personally feel that's crucial. So even if you have a very strong meditation practice, you're unlikely to meditate for more than an hour a day. 2 hours would be extraordinary, which leaves 23 or 22 hours per day not meditating, 7 days a week. So unless your practice and your ethics and your principles and so on go into these 22, 23 hours alongside meditation, it's not going to have much effect on your life. So meditation is great, but somehow you've got to build a bridge between what you do there and what you do in the rest of your life. So I guess that's what this series is about. So my particular topic tonight is kind of how to take it into our lives, and maybe even further than our lives, into the kind of issues and communities and suffering, to put it bluntly, that surrounds us. So not knowing you, I don't know what your stories are that kind of brought you to the Buddhist Center, brought you to this class, brought you to Buddhism, however long ago it is. I know what my story was, or is, but I don't know yours. My personal guess is that in most cases, it's got something to do with dissatisfaction. Something in your life was just not working. It was unsatisfactory. Maybe it was quite intense, real, genuine, heartfelt suffering. Maybe it was just a kind of underlying dis-ease or a feeling of, is this it, really? Am I meant to do this the rest of my life? Something niggling anyway, something not right. But I don't know that. But what I'd like to do to start off this talk is invite all of us in a short kind of meditation to kind of take our minds back to whatever it was in your personal cases that brought you to the Buddhist Center. So what I'd like is just, I'll lead us through a short reflection, entirely private, so no one's going to, ask you to kind of reveal all, just to kind of reconnect. What brought you along in the first place? Which might have been a month ago, might have been decades ago, I don't know. So let's do that. I suggest closing your eyes, unless you object to that, and just taking your mind back. There was a time, so first of all, try to remember the first time you walked through the door of a Buddhist center. It might have been Shrewsbury, it might be somewhere else, but there you were standing outside, ringing the bell and walking through the door. And how was that, coming into the Buddhist center first time? And if you can connect with that memory, that experience, and that feeling in particular, try and take your mind a little bit further back to the state of mind or the situation that propelled you, or drew you, pushed you, whatever it is, to the Buddhist center? Why were you standing outside the door, ringing the doorbell? Just try to connect with that feeling. Whatever it was that started you off on this path, which obviously includes Buddhism to some degree today. And then just to finish with, connecting with why you approached the Buddhist center, your first kind of entry into the Buddhist center. But if you can, remember, bring to mind the first fruits of your time at the Buddhist center. They might not have been straight away. Maybe you had a bumpy beginning, I don't know. But at some point, something must have clicked or you wouldn't be here tonight. Just try and remember the first fruits of your contact with us or with Buddhism. They might be subtle, might be quite dramatic, might be meditation, it might be meeting people. But what were those fruits? Something worked and you kept coming. Okay, thank you for that. Well, it's a bit later on in the evening, we'll be in small groups arranged by Vajrapriya. And if you want to use part of that time for sharing, feel free. But I would say that those kind of initial experiences are significant to us. They're kind of what started us off, and quite likely they're kind of themes in our lives just going forwards. Personally, I came along to Buddhism when I was fairly young, like 20. I'm 62 now, so it's a few decades ago. I was a kind of student at university, and just it was all quite existential for me. I was definitely in this whole swamp of thinking, what is life about? What is the point? Who cares? Quite a strong kind of disillusionment with the status quo and the straight and narrow and the career path and conventional society and so on. I knew I didn't want it. I didn't quite know what I did want, but I didn't want all that. So I was kind of looking for something. And a little bit connected with it is, I remember when I was a teenager, I had this kind of recurring fantasy of being part of a secret network, a secret band of kind of brothers scattered around the country who all knew who each other were, and we could all call upon each other when we needed each other's help, and we'd all kind of spring into action to kind of, you know, assist each other and make things happen. And I had this vision of myself traveling the country, just connecting with these people one after the next, and you know, call it Sangha. I was looking for something, this kind of secret band of fellow travelers, and here we are. So that's me. So quite a bit of what we call dukkha in Buddhism, but in a slightly vague, you know, existential sense rather than real suffering. Anyway, what I want to talk about tonight is kind of raise a question. It's there in the title, but I've reformulated it slightly as I was writing the talk. So in the title it says, Buddhists like retreating, but should they be advancing as well? So what I'm thinking is, when you think of a retreat, it's quite a personal experience. We talk about I'm going on retreat. You're taking yourself as an individual out of your busy life, whatever it is, stepping back, dropping the responsibilities, and focusing on yourself in order to go deeper into meditation or study or whatever it is. So retreats and that kind of focus on the self is a very important part of Buddhism. And very likely, when we came along, our focus was quite self-orientated. I was suffering. I wanted calm. I wanted less stress, whatever it is. Quite a personal, self-orientated motivation. And I'm not criticizing that in the slightest. It's the classic Buddhist beginning of things. But the question is, does that, how far will that motivation sustain us as we go along the path? So one feature of Buddhism is it's got different metaphors for what happens in the spiritual life. And a very strong metaphor, although not the only one, is of a path. And the notion of a path is you start somewhere, your first, beginning, and then you progress through different stages of the journey. And if you're lucky, you culminate in the glorious, wisdom and compassion of enlightenment. But you go through various stages of getting there. So for most of us, the first stage or couple of stages may well be this quite self-referential focus. And the emphasis will be on setting up conditions that support you to be more ethical, to be calmer, to be less stressed, to develop a meditation practice, to build up some friendships, all those things that support us. So another key teaching of Buddhism, alongside this metaphor of a path, is the whole underpinning reality of conditionality. So Buddhism says everything arises in dependence on conditions. If you want a meditation practice, you have to create the conditions that will support your meditation. If you want friendships, you create the conditions to support friendships, time and interest and so on. If you want a more ethical life, you create the conditions that don't tempt you into unethics and so on. So to follow the path successfully involves identifying the necessary conditions that will support us in our practice. And to develop a meditation practice and so on, as I've been talking, the conditions will be supporting us as individuals. But if you look at the classic descriptions of the path in Buddhism, they kind of go from what's called samatha, which you can translate as calm, to vipassana, which you can translate as insight, or prajna, which you can translate as insight. So insight is a different thing. Insight is seeing through into the true nature of reality, including the kind of illusion of our self-referential ego, into the kind of much, much bigger reality of interconnectedness of all beings. So the question I'm asking really is, do the conditions that support us in the first phase, are they the same as we kind of move along the path? And I would say they're not. I would say we need different things to keep us moving forwards if we're going to make real progress in the spiritual life. So one notion about a path is you start off somewhere and you're going to have some motivation because something's pushing you, something's brought you to the Buddhist center. But the danger is you can go a certain distance along and then kind of run out of steam. And I certainly know this from my own experience. You kind of sort out the first thing that impelled you into meditation or Buddhism or whatever it is. You've kind of done it. You're not so stressed. You've got some friends. You've removed that source of dukkha in your life. And then you can kind of gracefully grind to a halt and settle down in a better place than where you were, but still a long way short of enlightenment. So one thing Sangha used to warn us about was exactly the danger of settling down. And I think in order to avoid that, we need to kind of look at how to go forwards. And when you look at vipassana or insight, it's spoken about in a very different way to the way samatha or calm is spoken about. So some of the metaphors, they're much more kind of drastic or dramatic, challenging metaphors. So some of them is, one of them is entering the tiger's cave. One of them is sitting in the cremation ground. One of them is the crucial situation. One of them is, let's have a look, I've lost my place already. One of them is, where's it gone? Oh, here we are. Yes, breaking through into Buddhahood. So quite intense, dramatic metaphors, where you're not just cultivating calm and peace and relaxation, you're kind of confronted with a much more urgent situation where you kind of rise to the challenge or bust, kind of Buddhahood or bust, if you like. So Sangha summed these up, I believe, with a single word, which was intensity. So in order to develop insight, he says what you needed was intensity, not just calm, peaceful, meditative relaxation, but something intense that kind of really pushed you into a new forwards on the path. This came up in particular in a seminar he did years ago now with one of our largest and most successful businesses. It was called Windhorse Trading. It's now defunct, sadly. But they were working really, really hard, trying to make money to fund all kinds of Buddhist projects all over the world. But they were starting to wonder, why are we doing this? What on earth is the point of working really, really hard in a warehouse, packing and unpacking and shipping gifts from all sorts of places, when we could be on retreat? I mean, the Buddha didn't do this, did he? The Buddha spent his life under a tree meditating. So they asked Sangha to lead a seminar for them on insight and why right livelihood, what they're doing, might be a good idea for them or not. And they pushed him quite hard to explore the territory. But he was advocating intensity. What you need to develop insight and really go forwards is intensity, because that forces you in a way into progress. So I'd like to explore this a little bit. I mean, whether or not you agree with it or disagree with it, I don't know at this point. It's something we can explore in the small groups. But it's definitely part of the Buddhist path. To develop insight requires something more, call it intensity. And then the question facing us is, how can we create that in our lives? And I think there's many, many ways to do it. So one way, for sure, is to intensify your meditation practice. Just sit on that cushion for hours a day. Really, really go for it. Non-stop, long meditation retreats. Go up a mountain, don't come down. Live on nettles, be like Milarepa, and meditation may work. But for most of us, and I include myself, we just can't quite do it. I can't quite do it. So my source of intensity, and maybe others, has to come from somewhere else. Personally, I've always found, I've always been drawn to kind of ambitious and, if possible, slightly crazy projects, working with others to make something happen together. And my main context in these 20, 30 years of Triratna has been Buddhafield. Some of you might have been, I don't know. Buddhafield is a bunch of Buddhists who do things in fields. Surprise, surprise. And most Buddhist centres are fairly settled affairs where there's a phase of building and it's all a bit crazy. But you get the job done, you open the centre, and then everything settles down and there's not so much left to do apart from dusting and making the tea and washing up. But Buddhafield requires an entire setup for every single event and an entire tat down for every single event, whatever the weather, all over the different places each time, and it's kind of non-stop. You just have to do it, and there's a lot of intensity there. And I've been part of some Buddhafield events which are just crazy, completely nuts. Whether it's teaching meditation at Glastonbury Festival, I remember standing in front of the class and the people were sitting maybe 6 feet away, literally having to shout, "Now focus on your breath," because the music was so loud, if I didn't shout, they wouldn't hear. And it was crazy, but it worked, and I loved it. Another, also completely crazy weather. There was one retreat we did where we arrived on the Friday, and it just started raining. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and it didn't stop until the very last day when it finally let up. So stuff like that just kind of forces you to rise to the occasion or sink or swim. Anyway, so team-based projects is a classic Triratna source of intensity. But as many others, I believe more and more that the business of raising children, parenting, is an extraordinary source of intensity. There is nothing like young children to force you to go beyond your comfort zone and just do what you have to do at all times of the day and nights and weekends and 24/7 for years on end. So I think parents have an extraordinary opportunity to transcend themselves, in a sense for the sake of their nearest and dearest, but still transcend themselves. So raising children and parenting. I think even just sustaining a relationship with another human being is going to be, from time to time at least, an extraordinary source of intensity. These last 9 years I've lived with my partner, and you just have to go beyond your preferences again and again. You have to forgive again and again. You have to confess again and again. You know, it's just a kind of a situation which forces you to go beyond your personal preferences. Caring for the sick, which I've not done so much of myself, but I've just known plenty of carers. And again, it's a source of intensity. You have to go beyond yourself into a kind of wider sphere of concern. Fundraising. I have done some fundraising. Saravantu and I were both trustees of Karinar. And when I became a trustee, I kind of felt I have to kind of do what they do. So I promised to do a Karinar 6-week Karinar fundraising appeal, where you just knock on hundreds of doors and ask them very nicely for money. And you have to learn to accept rejection again and again and again and again, and approach the next door with the same positivity and open-minded openness every time. And it was in Edinburgh, and it was hard work. It was hard work. So that was a source of intensity, all with different kind of flavors. And in a sense, the theme of tonight's talk is campaigning, social campaigning for social issues, justice, whatever it might be. Campaigning is going to be a source of intensity. Yes. So what I'm saying is to keep going on the spiritual path, once you've mastered the basics of meditation and so on, you need to consider what will take you forwards. And quite likely it's going to be some kind of intensification of your practice or your circumstances, which could be many different things, but including campaigning. When I was kind of first getting into this territory, I started looking around the Buddhist world to see what other groups did. And I came across a couple of great examples which really inspired me, actually. I would like to mention just for the record. So one was this outfit you've probably never heard of, called the ZPO. The ZPO. The ZPO is the Zen Peacemaker Order, headed up by a guy called Bernie Glassman, an American Buddhist. And their thing was to not do retreats, but do what they called advances, hence the title of my talk. And they felt in order to make progress, you had to plunge. That's another word they used. You had to plunge into a situation where you were completely out of your comfort zone. In other words, it's going to be intense. And the one we came across and we tried was a street retreat. So imagine most people here have done retreats, but a street retreat is where you meet somewhere, maybe a friend's house, you take everything out of your pockets, you leave behind your bags, or whatever it is, you walk into the city centre, ideally a few of you, and you simply have a retreat, starting then and there in the middle of the city for a number of days, if not a week. And you're plunged, you're thrown into that completely different situation, and you learn to do what it takes. So we heard about it, and we read the kind of guidelines, and we tried it out on the streets of London, myself and some friends. And to be honest, we had an easy time. It didn't rain. Nobody tried to beat us up. The police were nice and so on. But I just kind of love the slightly crazy Zen wisdom idea of it. They also had a practice of going into kind of conflict situations, kind of as a, hopefully to help, but also as part of their spiritual practice. And what they said was, if you're going to go into a conflict situation, there were three kind of rules to bear in mind, which had a strong effect on me at the time. So the first one was to turn up in a state of not knowing. In other words, no preconceptions about who's right and who's wrong and who's done this and who's done that and what the solution is. Just drop all that. Practice not knowing. Again, quite a Zen thing, I guess. Secondly, you turn up and you bear witness, which means you just practice awareness in the moment of the situation without this judgment. You bear witness. You just really take it in, what is going on. And there's going to be conflict, there's going to be suffering, but you bear witness to it. You kind of allow yourself to be affected by it. And the third thing is trust that right action will spontaneously arise. So then you just kind of know what to do after some time of bearing witness. And I found this very powerful little set of precepts, not coming from the Buddha, but coming from the ZPO, Zen Peacemaker Order. And one place we put them into practice was on demonstrations. So a while back, I think there were more demonstrations in Britain in those days, I don't know, marches and demonstrations and stuff. It was the time of the Iraq War, which I can't remember when it was, but some years ago now. And there were enormous marches in London, which I went on. I kind of felt strongly I had to do something, and I went on them. And I found it quite unsatisfactory because you just part of this huge crowd walking along, shouting angry slogans, and so what? So we were looking around for something, more meaningful to do as Buddhists, and came across a friend of mine who had a lifetime of being an animal liberationist. And he had had this lifetime of campaigning for animal liberation, including all sorts of quite aggressive, direct actions, breaking into laboratories, smashing things, painting slogans on walls, and so on, and done numerous prison times. But again, he had come to the end of that because he was so disenchanted with the level of anger and hate that was behind it all. So he'd come up with a notion of meditate to liberate, where he would go to the laboratories and so on, but instead of trying to smash them or shout abuse, he would simply sit down with his placards and meditate in full view of the people, and he found it much more satisfying. And we decided to import it into the marches. So the next march, instead of marching, we found somewhere to sit and simply meditated. And I felt really good about it, actually. I felt very kind of empowered because we were there for the issue itself, but also somehow saying something to the angry shouters, as in you don't have to be so angry. And the specific strongest experience was the Olympics, which must have been 2012, when the Chinese were hosting the Olympics in China. But the Olympic flame was on a worldwide journey, and it came through London. And this was the occasion for enormous kind of anti-China, pro-Tibet protests by the Chinese and Tibetan community. But we decided to go. I suppose I feel an affinity for Tibet, but not to march or shout, but to meditate. So we went there, and hundreds of crowds lining the streets to watch the flame, including the demonstrating crowds. There were Tibetan ones and Chinese ones. And we found a place to meditate, which turned out to be right in between two camps. So one side was the pro-Chinese, on the other side the pro-Tibetans, and we were meditating. And the flame came through kind of in a flash, to be quite frank. Somebody was running, they just ran past, a little phalanx of bodyguards escorting them, lots of police on motorcycles, and then they're gone. And once they're gone, that's when it's felt suddenly incredibly unpredictable. It's like the adults had left the room and there was nothing left but two camps who would fight each other at a second's notice. And you could just feel the kind of tension in the air between the pro-Chinese and the pro-Tibetans. And we were meditating right in the middle of them. And I must say, it felt electric. And if somebody had thrown something, I think anything could have happened. So yeah, that's yeah. We were kind of playing, I think, looking for this intensity, some way to practice which would have an effect on the world around us, beyond us, and be taken into our own personal practice. So I'm sure there's many other sources of intensity. And I think it's a question, there's no single right answer. You know, we can each come to our own solutions. We've all got to decide how to live our lives. I've written this talk, but completely failed to follow my notes in any systematic order. So I'm just going to check I haven't missed anything out. Yes. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about social action as one possible source of intensity. I don't think it's the only one, but it's one that's maybe particularly valuable. And the reason it might be valuable is because built into the spiritual path is a growth in awareness. So we start off, and I think quite naturally and quite rightly, with a more or less focus on ourselves, our state of mind, our stress, our suffering, whatever. But the first thing we'll be learning is awareness, mindfulness. And hopefully you've been taught that mindfulness doesn't end with your meditation practice. Mindfulness is something to take out into the world and live your life with an expanded, more mindful perspective. So Sangha actually just speaks of 4 dimensions of awareness. The first is ourselves, naturally. The second is other people. The third is the environment, and the fourth is reality, what he calls reality. So we're definitely encouraged to take our awareness in and be aware of the world around us, people around us, the environment around us, and so on. And if you do that, you'll very quickly realize that your personal dukkha is shared by many, many, many other people, if not everybody. And very likely, many, many people have more dukkha, more suffering, more pain than you do. And then the question arises, what are you going to do about it? Because the second thing that we learn if we come and learn meditation is loving kindness, this kind of other regarding, well-wishing, sense of connection. So kind of built into the Buddhist path is a kind of growth in what I'd call a positive tension, where there's our natural desire to sort ourselves out and, dwell and enjoy calm and peace. But there's also this growing awareness of others and other dukkha, and how to respond to that tension. So I've talked about intensity, but I think part of it is realizing that other people need what we have got, some kind of access to the spiritual path, and they also need conditions in their lives to support them in that. And a lot of social campaigning is trying to help others have more supportive conditions, which could be anything from the absolute basics, food and shelter, to more access to justice, to access to health, or whatever. But campaigning is kind of wanting others to share some of the benefits that we have. And I think that awareness kind of pulls us beyond ourselves, and we have to find our own resolution of that balance. So I think Buddhism talks of the middle way, and there's always 2 extremes, and somewhere in the middle is a more satisfactory and fruitful middle way. So one extreme is we remain focused completely on ourselves, just me, my practice, my enlightenment, my retreats, my whatever. The other extreme is to become completely focused on saving all beings. Some Buddhists call it rhetoric, is quite kind of extreme in this way. I will save all beings. And we can kind of take this a bit over literally, plunge into all sorts of things, and kind of get burned out very quickly. But somewhere in the middle is a balance that will sustainable for us and helpful for others. And we have to kind of find what it is. That's going to be different for different people, because I think intensity is found in different places for different people. Yes. One way Sangha speaks about it is we have to kind of crank up the intensity to such a point that something kind of bursts. You probably know there's this figure of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, a strange figure with circles and circles of hands reaching out in all directions. And the story behind it is that he decided to save all beings. That's what he's going to do, save all beings. So he set out to do it and worked and worked and worked, and at some point stepped back and realized he'd hardly dented the ocean of suffering. And at this point, a moment of disillusionment or despair swept over him. And at that point, he cracked up into 1,000 pieces. He just fell to pieces. But happily, the Buddha stepped in and reassembled him in this new form with 1,000 arms and 11 heads. And he was able, and 2 arms at the center holding this kind of mysterious egg, you'll see in the images, which somehow is a source of peace and sustainability. And from that point onwards, he was able to kind of balance activity with stillness. So I think I need to conclude actually, so we have time for groups. In a sense, I haven't got a conclusion, because I think the conclusion lies with each of us as to come up with the answer of how best to construct the most helpful conditions for us in our lives. That's going to be different answers at different times, so it's a question we can continue asking ourselves. But I think once we've gone beyond the first stage of sorting ourselves out and a basic level of calm and ethics and so on, the next question is how to create that intensity that will kind of push us beyond ourselves into this kind of less egoic, more interconnected and more enlightened state. I think there's a million ways to get this wrong, but there's also many, many ways to get it right. So I tried to explore some sources of intensity. I think I've only really touched on social action, so I apologize for that. But I'd like to end by just kind of reminding us of that precept from the ZPO, that if we practice not knowing and practice bearing witness, we can trust that right action will spontaneously arise in each of us. And what I would add to that is, if we can find ways of doing things with others, like-minded people, that is particularly valuable, because then they're Sangha as well. I think that's something Triratna particularly excels in, is Sangha. So let right action spontaneously arise with others, if we can. But what I'd like to do now is end with a kind of more forward-looking meditation. So inviting us to close our eyes, just take your attention inwards, connect with yourself. Here we are, physically, mentally. It's the end of a day, maybe the end of a long day. Maybe you're a bit zoomed out. Maybe you're quite excited, tired, confused. Just connecting with yourself anyway. But then connecting with what keeps you practicing, the Dharma or keeps you practicing Buddhism? What is it that still matters to you? And it could be a pull towards some ideal, or it could be some kind of grit, some kind of dukkha, that you're looking to resolve. Or maybe you don't have a clear answer at the moment. That's fine, but just connecting with your present relationship with the spiritual life. And then kind of contemplating how to make that specific. What to do, what to set up, what conditions to create that might help you tangibly take the next step forward. It could be more friendship, more study, could be some challenging, intense, something you need. Just try and kind of bring your future steps into focus. What do they really look like? And in a way, what you need next is some kind of resolution, some kind of determination to actually do them, actually take those steps. I will, whatever it is. Meditate more. Be nice to your kids. Campaign for that cause you've been troubled by. Whatever it is. Just trying to get a sense of the shape, if you like, of your next few steps on the spiritual path and what you need, what conditions you need to take them. And if you don't know, just asking, well, what would help bring clarity? Talking to somebody maybe. And then beyond the immediate next steps, which are the most important on any journey, just taking your mind way forwards, right towards the end of the path. How do you kind of see the end result you're aiming at? What would it be like to be enlightened, or however you conceive of it? What's your kind of future if all works out perfectly? And just giving yourself a bit of space these next few minutes to kind of contemplate the path, the goal, and your immediate next steps as best as you can. If you relate to what I said about intensity tonight, where will that come from? How will you kind of bring it into your life? If you don't relate to intensity, that's fine. But what is the main thing that will sustain you going forwards? So we'll end this now. If you want to maybe consider writing that down, just to kind of crystallize it a little bit more tangibly, write it down somewhere, put it under your pillow, share it with a friend, but try and keep hold of it as something to take seriously in your life. And we'll hand over to Jayaratna to end the evening for us.
Actually, just before Jayaratna does that, I wanted to say thank you to you very much, Lokabandhu, for zooming in and joining us this evening. And I just had a sense listening to you of how sense of you bringing various things together for me. So both that sense of a kind of, the ambitiousness of a lofty ideal and your willingness to be in relationship with big ideals, at the same time as very grounded in just kind of the stuff of life, living our lives and the next steps. And I really enjoyed this sense of you being inspired by the ZPO and meditating in different places. And the sense kind of, as you spoke, I had a sense of both the kind of stillness and calmness, ease in your presence, and in a way, a kind of dynamism and willingness to be active and engaged with the world. That was, something just, in your sharing that for me really exemplified what you were saying. And I leave it feeling, as you ended, just a sense of possibility, optimism and possibility. Thank you for bringing that into the space.